What kind of son smiles through stale leftovers while his whole family carves fresh steaks? And why did their screams at sunrise echo through the house as every card they owned failed and every account froze? How does a 28-year-old former oil and gas extraction worker go from being treated like trash at his own mother's table to watching her panic when her world collapses in a single morning? While you're here, don't forget to subscribe, hit the hype button, and support this channel with a like. And tell us below, have you ever faced something like this? I arrived at my mother's house at exactly 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening in late October. Not late, not early, exactly when she told me to be there. The porch light was already on, casting a pale yellow glow across the concrete steps I'd helped pour 3 years ago when Grant decided he wanted to upgrade the entry. I'd mixed the cement while he supervised with a beer in one hand and his phone in the other, occasionally shouting instructions that contradicted what he'd said 5 minutes earlier. I knocked twice. The door swung open before my knuckles left the wood. Finally, my mother said. Marlene Hale, 54 years old, hair dyed the same auburn shade she'd worn since I was 12. She didn't step aside to let me in, just stood there in the doorway, blocking it like a checkpoint guard. We've been waiting. I'm on time, I said, glancing at my watch. 6 o'clock exactly. Barely. She turned away, leaving the door open behind her, an invitation that felt more like a warning than a welcome. Inside, the smell of grilled steak filled the hallway. Rich, savory, the kind of aroma that makes your mouth water involuntarily. My stomach responded before my brain could stop it. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, a protein bar at dawn before my shift ended at the extraction site. I'd been working a final contract there, clearing equipment and closing out old projects. Dirty work that left you covered in grime and exhaustion. Honest work that paid well and broke your body slowly. The dining room table was set for 4. Marlene sat at the head. Grant, my stepfather, occupied the opposite end, his thick forearms resting on either side of his plate like he was guarding it. My sister Talia sat to his right, scrolling through her phone with one hand while adjusting her hair with the other, her nails painted bright red. 3 plates held perfect cuts of ribeye steak, grilled to what looked like medium-rare perfection. The meat was thick and juicy, with char marks from the grill. Asparagus spears glistened with butter and garlic. Roasted potatoes, golden brown and crispy, were arranged artfully beside the meat. The kind of meal you'd photograph for a cooking blog or a restaurant menu. The 4th spot, my spot, sat empty except for a small plastic container. Tupperware, the kind with the cracked lid that never quite seals right, the kind you use for actual leftovers you plan to throw away in 3 days when they start to smell. I stood there for 3 full seconds, staring at it, processing what I was seeing, understanding what it meant. Sit down, Aaron, Marlene said without looking up from her plate. She was already cutting into her steak, the knife making a clean sound against the ceramic. Don't just hover like that. It's awkward. I pulled out the chair and sat down slowly. The container was translucent enough to show what was inside. Leftover meatloaf from 2 nights ago, a scoop of cold mashed potatoes that had formed a crust on top, and 3 green beans that looked like they'd given up on life sometime around Tuesday. Grant cut into his steak with obvious satisfaction. The knife made that perfect sound, the sound of sharp metal through tender meat. A small amount of juice pooled on his plate, dark and rich. Good to see you could make it, he said without looking up. Long day at work? Yeah, I said quietly. Must be tough, Talia said, finally glancing up from her phone. Her expression was somewhere between amusement and disdain. You know, since you're almost 30 and still doing manual labor, don't they have, younger guys for that kind of thing? Marlene made a small noise that might have been agreement or amusement. Hard to tell the difference anymore. They blended together when it came to me. I opened the Tupperware. The meatloaf was dense and dry, the kind of dry that happens when you reheat something twice and all the moisture has evaporated. The potatoes had formed a skin on top, and when I poked them with my fork, they cracked like old paint. The green beans were cold and limp. You should be grateful, Grant said, pointing his fork at me in that casual, dismissive way he had. Not everyone gets a home-cooked meal. Some people don't have family to come home to. This is leftovers, I said quietly. Same thing, Marlene said, not looking up. Food is food. You're not starving. Don't be dramatic. Talia smirked, that particular expression she'd perfected over the years, the one that said she was better than me, and we both knew it. A guy like you doesn't need more than scraps anyway. You're not exactly doing hard labor anymore, right? Just clean up, pushing papers and taking inventory. I picked up my fork. The metal felt heavier than it should have, cold against my palm. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not anger, not sadness. something colder and sharper and more permanent. Clarity, pure crystalline clarity. I ate the meatloaf. I ate the potatoes. I ate the green beans. I didn't taste any of it. It was just texture and temperature, dry, cold, lifeless, sustenance without joy, food without respect. They talked around me like I wasn't there. Grant complained about a customer at his auto shop who'd questioned a charge on his bill, had the audacity to suggest that replacing a serpentine belt shouldn't cost $400. Marlene mentioned a vacation she and Grant were planning, somewhere coastal, expensive, involving a resort with spa treatments and ocean views. Talia talked about needing a new laptop for her online classes, the ones she'd been taking for 3 years, without finishing a degree or declaring a major. Nobody asked me a single question. Not about my day, my work, my life, my thoughts, my feelings. Nothing. I was furniture. A presence tolerated but not acknowledged. When I finished eating the cold, joyless meal, I stood up and carried my empty container to the kitchen. I rinsed it in the sink carefully, dried it with a dish towel, and set it on the counter next to the other dishes that were piling up. "Leaving already?" Marlene called from the dining room. Her tone suggested disappointment, but not the kind that came from genuine emotion. The performative kind, the kind that checked a box. "Yeah," I said. "Typical," Grant muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Meant for me to hear. Can't even stay for conversation. Always running off. I walked out the front door without saying goodbye. The night air was cool against my face, crisp with the smell of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. October air that promised winter was coming. I got into my truck, a 2015 Ford F-150 I'd bought with my own money and maintained with my own hands, and sat there for a moment, staring at the lit windows of the house. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification from my banking app. The notification I'd set up to alert me of any transaction over $500. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Withdrawal, $847. ATM, location, downtown branch. Time, 4:32 p.m. I hadn't made that withdrawal. I'd been at the extraction yard at 4:32 p.m., 30 miles away from downtown, finishing inventory logs and filing paperwork with hands covered in dust. I stared at the notification for a long moment. Then I started the engine and drove home, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind already beginning to calculate. My apartment was small, but it was mine. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for one person to move around in. The living room doubled as my office, with a desk pushed against one wall and a couch facing a TV I barely watched. But every piece of furniture I'd bought myself. Every bill I paid on time. No one's name on the lease but my own. No one's permission needed for anything. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen's glow lit up the dark room as I logged into my bank account, entering my password with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from checking it multiple times a day. There it was, the $847 withdrawal. Made it 4:32 p.m. while I'd been finishing paperwork at the extraction yard, my hands covered in dust and my boots caked with dried mud from the field. I scrolled through the recent transactions, going back days, then weeks, then months. A pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemicals. Another withdrawal 3 days ago, $320, gas station on the west side of town. A week before that, $651, department store. Women's clothing section based on the merchant code. 2 weeks before that, $1,200, electronics store. Laptop purchase, most likely. 3 weeks before that, $890. Restaurant charges spread across one evening. Expensive restaurant charges. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, counting the water stains that had been there since I moved in 2 years ago. 7 of them, shaped like continents I couldn't name. Islands in a plaster ocean. I'd been working in oil and gas extraction for 7 years. Dangerous work. The kind where you wake up before dawn in the freezing cold and come home after dark in any weather, covered in grime and exhaustion and the particular smell of machinery and petroleum that never quite washes out of your clothes no matter how many times you launder them. But it paid well. Better than most jobs available to someone like me. No college degree, no special training, no connections to leverage. Just a strong back and a willingness to show up every single day and do what needed to be done. The work broke down your body slowly, methodically, inevitably. Your joints ached in the morning when you first woke up. Your hands cramped when you tried to open jars or grip tools. Your lungs filled with dust you couldn't quite cough out, no matter how hard you tried. Your hearing deteriorated from constant exposure to loud machinery. But the money was steady and substantial, and I'd been good at the work. Good enough that they'd kept me on longer than most, eventually promoting me to inventory and logistics when the younger guys took over the heavy lifting. I'd saved carefully, lived below my means. avoided debt like it was contagious, drove an old truck, wore clothes until they wore out, ate simple meals, put money away every single month like it was a religion I followed devoutly. And then, about 4 years ago, my mother had asked for help. It was small at first, innocent even. "Just add me as a secondary user on your account," she'd said over coffee at the diner on Route 9. "In case of emergencies. You know how things can be? What if something happens to you? What if there's a medical emergency and someone needs to access your funds quickly?" I'd hesitated. Something in my gut had warned me. Some instinct I'd learned to trust over years of dangerous work. But she was my mother. The woman who'd raised me, fed me, kept a roof over my head through my childhood. And Grant had just started his auto shop, which meant money was tight and uncertain. And Talia was in school, or pretending to be, taking online classes that never seemed to lead anywhere concrete. So I'd added her to my account. Secondary user privileges. Emergency access only. Limited permissions that seemed safe. "Just for emergencies," she'd promised, her hand on mine across the diner table. "I would never take advantage. You know that. You're my son. I love you." The withdrawals had started 6 months later. Small amounts at first. $50 here, $100 there. Easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention. When I'd asked about them casually, Marlene had explanations ready, practiced, delivered, with just the right amount of exasperation that I was even questioning her. The water heater broke and needed immediate replacement. The car needed urgent repairs to pass inspection. Talia needed books for her classes. Grant's shop had a slow month, and they couldn't make rent without help. I'd believed her because I'd wanted to. Because doubting your mother feels like betraying something fundamental about who you're supposed to be as a person. The amounts grew steadily over time. Grant started asking for temporary loans that were never repaid, never even acknowledged after the money changed hands. Talia needed rides, gas money, rent help, new clothes for job interviews that never seemed to materialize into actual jobs. Every request came with assurances that they'd pay me back soon, that this was just until things stabilized. That family helps family, and isn't that what we're supposed to do? Things never stabilized, the requests never stopped, the temporary became permanent. I'd stopped asking questions about 2 years ago. It seemed easier that way, less conflict, less confrontation. I made enough to cover it, I told myself. And confronting them felt exhausting, like trying to argue with the weather or the tides. But sitting there in my apartment, staring at the withdrawal history on my laptop screen, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I'd been a wallet with legs. An ATM machine that occasionally showed up for dinner and family events. Not a son, not a brother, not family in any real sense of the word. A resource to be extracted until there was nothing left. A mine to be worked until it ran dry. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the desk hard enough to make a sound. Another notification. Withdrawal, 520 Wardsjärds. Retail purchase. Nordstrom. Time, 7:43 p.m. I looked at the clock on my laptop. 7:51 p.m. 8 minutes ago. While I'd been driving home from their house, digesting cold leftovers and processing my humiliation, someone had been spending my money at an upscale department store. I closed the laptop slowly and sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the building around me. Someone's TV through the wall playing what sounded like a game show. Footsteps above me, heavy and rhythmic. A car alarm in the parking lot that no one was bothering to silence. I didn't feel angry. Anger was hot and explosive and temporary. I felt something colder than anger, something that settled in my chest like ice water and didn't melt, something permanent, clarity, pure, absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. The next morning, I woke at 5:30 like always and drove to the oil field equipment yard where I'd worked for the last 7 years. The place was mostly empty now. Contracts were ending, sites shutting down, workers moving on to new locations or new industries entirely. The oil boom that had sustained us had peaked and declined, and now we were in the cleanup phase. I'd been kept on for inventory management, documentation, and final equipment processing. The work that nobody else wanted to do, but that absolutely had to be done right. The yard foreman, a man named Dutch who'd worked in extraction for 30 years and had the scars and bad joints to prove it, was in the trailer office when I arrived. He looked up from his clipboard, his weathered face creasing into something approximating a smile. "Hale," he said. "You're here early. Again. You know the contract doesn't pay overtime for early arrivals, right?" "I know," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot that had been sitting on the burner since yesterday afternoon. It tasted like burnt rubber dissolved in motor oil, but it was hot and caffeinated, and that was enough. "Dedicated," Dutch said, setting down his clipboard and studying me with the kind of attention that comes from 3 decades of reading people in high-stress situations. "You've been good at this work, you know that? Most guys would have half done it and collected the check. Minimum effort for minimum consequences. But you actually give a damn about getting it right. Not my style to do things halfway, I said. Dutch nodded slowly, still studying me. You got something lined up after this contract ends? Because it's ending in 3 weeks. You know that, right? Not yet, I said honestly. You should start looking. You're solid, reliable. You've got skills that translate to a lot of industries. Companies need people who can track things, manage logistics, make sure nothing falls through the cracks. That's valuable. Don't sell yourself short just because you don't have a degree. Thanks, I said. I'm serious, Hale. You've got more going for you than you think. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I spent the morning cataloging equipment with methodical precision, checking serial numbers against manifests, updating spreadsheets with the kind of attention to detail that had always come naturally to me. It was work that let your mind wander while your hands stayed busy, work that didn't require constant decision-making but rewarded consistency and accuracy. I thought about the years I'd spent here, the injuries I'd accumulated along the way, the scar on my left forearm from a cable snap that could have been much worse, the permanent ache in my right knee from a fall off a platform, the constant ringing in my ears that never quite went away from too many hours near loud machinery without proper protection. The friends I'd made and lost when they moved to other sites, other states, other lives entirely. The overtime I'd worked to keep my accounts full, sacrificing sleep and weekends and any semblance of a social life. Money that had vanished into my family's hands like water through a drain. Money I'd earned with my body and my time. Money I'd never see again. At lunch, I drove to the diner on Route 9. It was the kind of place where truckers and field workers ate. Vinyl booths with duct tape repairs, laminate tables scarred by decades of coffee cups and dropped silverware. Coffee that tasted like it had been brewed yesterday and reheated this morning. The kind of place where nobody judged you for showing up dirty from work. But the food was cheap and filling, and they didn't rush you if you wanted to sit for a while and think. Uncle Ron was already there, sitting in his usual spot by the window where he could watch the parking lot and the highway beyond. He was my mother's older brother, 52 years old, with a face weathered by construction work and a voice that sounded like gravel tumbling in a cement mixer. We'd never been particularly close growing up, but he was the only member of the family who'd ever treated me like an actual person instead of a resource to be managed and exploited. Aaron, he said as I slid into the booth across from him, you look like you're thinking too hard about something. That's never a good sign in my experience. Maybe, I said noncommittally. The waitress brought me coffee without asking. I'd been coming here long enough that she knew my order by heart. Black coffee, no sugar, and whatever the lunch special was, as long as it wasn't fish. Ron studied me for a moment with those sharp eyes of his, the kind of eyes that had seen a lot of life and didn't miss much. Everything all right with you? Define all right. He chuckled, a sound like rocks tumbling in a barrel. Fair enough. That's a philosophical question if I ever heard one. He took a bite of his burger, chewed slowly, then set it down deliberately. You know, I heard your mom and Grant talking at the family cookout last month? The one you didn't come to? I was working, I said. Double shift. Couldn't get away. I know. They mentioned that too. Said you were always working. Always too busy for family. Ron's tone was careful, measured, like he was approaching something dangerous. But then they started talking about how they've got you under control. Those were the exact words they used. Under control. I looked up from my coffee, really looked at him. What? Yeah, Ron said, his eyes meeting mine steadily. They were laughing about it. Thought it was funny. Said you were easy to manage, easy to manipulate, that you'd never push back, never make waves, never cause problems, that you were reliable that way, like a piece of equipment that always works when you need it. I set my coffee cup down slowly, carefully, feeling the heat through the ceramic. They said that, those exact words. Word for word, I was standing about 10 feet away cleaning the grill. They didn't know I could hear them, or maybe they didn't care. Ron leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. Look, I stay out of family stuff as a general rule. Always have. It's not my place to get involved in whatever dynamics you all have going on. But you're a good kid, Aaron. Always have been, even when you were actually a kid. And I don't like seeing good people get used and taken advantage of. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like something was constricting it. Ron's voice softened even more. You don't owe them anything, you know, not a thing. You've already paid back whatever debt you think you have from them raising you. Paid it back 10 times over, probably more. At some point, you have to ask yourself when enough is enough. I stared at the table, at the scratches in the laminate surface, at the water ring from someone's glass that had been there so long it was permanent. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Withdrawal, $680. ATM. Location, Westside Mall. Time, 12:17 p.m. Right now, this very moment. While I sat here having this conversation, someone was draining my account again. I stood up abruptly, dropped a $20 bill on the table for my untouched coffee, and walked out without another word to Ron. I drove straight to my mother's house with my hand steady on the wheel despite the cold rage that had settled in my chest. The rage wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and calculating, the kind that makes you dangerous because you're thinking clearly, planning carefully, seeing every angle. Marlene answered the door with a dish towel in her hands, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation in the span of a single second. "Aaron, what are you doing here? It's the middle of the day. Shouldn't you be at work?" "Need to talk to you," I said, my voice flat and controlled. "Now's not a good time. Grant's at the shop and I'm in the middle of cleaning and—" "Now," I said, the single word carrying more weight than a paragraph of explanation. Something in my tone made her pause. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating, trying to figure out what this was about, but she stepped aside and let me in. The living room looked the same as always. Overstuffed furniture that had been expensive 10 years ago but was now showing its age, sagging cushions, worn fabric, stains that no amount of cleaning could remove, photos on the walls in mismatched frames, mostly of Talia at various ages, a few of Marlene and Grant on vacations I'd never been invited to, none of me, not a single one. The TV was on, playing some daytime talk show where people screamed at each other about paternity tests and relationship drama. I turned to face her, keeping my expression neutral, my posture relaxed. The withdrawals from my account. They need to stop. Today. Marlene's expression shifted from surprise to dismissal in less than a second. "What withdrawals? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I said quietly but firmly. "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. We both know exactly what I mean." "Oh, that." She waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly, like this was trivial and beneath discussion. "Aaron, those are for household expenses. Emergency expenses. You know that. We talked about this when you gave me access to the account years ago. $847 yesterday. $520 last night. $680 less than an hour ago. That's not household expenses. That's not emergencies." Her jaw tightened. A muscle in her cheek twitched. "It's not your business to question how I use." "It's my money," I said, cutting her off cleanly. "Your money?" Her voice rose sharply, indignantly. "Your money, everything you have because of us. We raised you, fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head for 18 years. You think that was free? You think you don't owe us for that?" "I was a child. That's what parents do. That's the basic responsibility of being a parent. That's not a debt I owe you." "Ungrateful," she said, stepping closer, her face flushing red with anger. "You've always been ungrateful, ever since you were little. We ask you for help, for small favors, and you act like we're robbing you, like we're criminals or something." "You are robbing me," I said calmly. "That's exactly what you're doing. Taking my money without permission, without asking, without any intention of paying it back." She pointed a finger at my chest, her hand shaking slightly. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare accuse me of stealing. I'm your mother. I gave you life. I sacrificed everything for you. Everything. You wouldn't even exist without me. And I've been paying you back for that sacrifice for 4 years. $47,000. That's how much you've taken from my account since I gave you emergency access." The number hung in the air between us like smoke, visible and toxic. Her expression flickered rapidly, surprise, anger, defensiveness, calculation, all cycling through in rapid succession. "That's ridiculous. That's an insane number. Where are you even getting that from?" "Transaction logs. Every single withdrawal, every purchase, every transfer, all documented with dates, times, amounts, and locations. I have records of everything." "You're keeping track?" Her voice dripped with disdain and disbelief. "You're actually keeping track of money you give to your own family? That's sick, Aaron. That's actually sick. What kind of person does that?" "The kind of person who's being stolen from," I said. "It stops now, today. No more withdrawals, no more access to my money." "Or what?" She crossed her arms defensively, trying to regain the power position. "What are you going to do? Cut off your own mother? Abandon your family? Turn your back on the people who raised you?" "If I have to, yes." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just bitterness and contempt. "You won't. You're too weak for that. You've always been too weak to stand up for yourself. That's why we can—" She stopped herself abruptly, but too late. The words were already out there. That's why you can what? I asked quietly, dangerously. Control me? Use me? Take advantage of me? Get out, she said, her voice suddenly cold and final. Get out of my house right now. Gladly, I said, turning toward the door. I heard her voice again, softer but no less cutting. Don't come back unless you're ready to apologize, unless you're ready to remember what family actually means, what loyalty means. I didn't respond. I didn't even pause. I just walked out and closed the door firmly behind me, hearing it latch with a solid, final click. That afternoon, I drove to Grant's auto shop with the same cold determination. It was a small operation on the edge of town, 3 bays with outdated equipment, a cluttered office with papers everywhere, and a parking lot full of cars in various states of repair and disrepair. The sign out front read Lewis Auto Repair in faded red letters that needed repainting. Grant was under a Honda Civic when I walked in, his legs sticking out from beneath the frame, work boots worn and oil-stained. He rolled out on a creeper when he heard footsteps, saw me standing there, and grinned that particular grin of his, the one that suggested he was always in on a joke you weren't getting. Aaron, what brings you here? Need work done on that old truck of yours? I can give you the family discount. He emphasized the last 2 words mockingly. Need to talk, I said. Sure. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag that was probably dirtier than his hands had been, spreading the grease around rather than removing it. What's up? You look serious. Something wrong? The money you and Mom have been taking from my account. It stops now, today. His grin faded slowly, like a light on a dimmer switch being turned down. Taking? I haven't taken anything from you. Your mom handles all that financial stuff. I don't even have access to your account directly. You knew about it. You knew she was taking my money. You benefited from it. He shrugged, his expression shifting to something between amusement and contempt. She mentioned it a few times, sure. So what? You make good money. Better money than most people. We needed help getting the shop off the ground, getting established. That's what family does, right? We help each other out when times are tough. Not anymore, I said firmly. Grant's expression hardened, his jaw setting in that way that meant he was about to get aggressive and confrontational. You think you're tough now? You think you can come into my shop, my place of business, and make demands? Is that what this is? You trying to assert yourself finally? I'm not making demands. I'm stating facts that you need to understand. The access to my account ends today. He stepped closer, deliberately invading my personal space in that way bullies do, trying to make themselves seem bigger and more threatening through proximity. You'd be nothing without us. You know that? Absolutely nothing. We gave you a place to land when you had nowhere else to go after high school. We supported you when you were struggling to find your way. We believed in you when nobody else did. I've been paying you back for that support for 4 years. With interest. More than enough to cover whatever help you gave me. And you'll keep paying, Grant said, his voice dropping lower, more menacing, more threatening. Because that's how this works. Family doesn't just stop helping family. You don't get to decide when you're done with your obligations. We decide that. I looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, saw the arrogance in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he was right and I was wrong, the conviction that he had power over me, that he could intimidate me into submission like he probably intimidated his customers. He was wrong about me, completely wrong. I turned and walked toward the door without another word. That's right, Grant called after me, his voice echoing in the garage. Run away, Aaron. That's what you're good at, isn't it? Running away when things get hard, when confrontation happens. You've always been weak like that. That's why we can walk all over you and you just take it. I paused at the door, my hand on the frame, but I didn't turn around. I just walked out into the afternoon sunlight and got in my truck. Behind me, I heard him laughing. The sound followed me all the way to my truck. I sat there for a moment in the parking lot, engine off, and opened my phone. Social media wasn't something I used much. I barely posted anything and rarely checked it, but I knew Talia posted constantly, documenting every aspect of her life for an audience that probably didn't care. Sure enough, she'd posted 20 minutes ago. The post was a photo of a shopping bag from an expensive boutique downtown, the kind of place where a single shirt costs more than my weekly grocery budget. The bag had tissue paper sticking out the top artfully. The caption read, "Treating myself today because I deserve it. Self-care isn't selfish. Treat yourself right." The timestamp matched almost exactly with the most recent withdrawal from Nordstrom that I'd seen last night. I took a screenshot of the post, saved it carefully to my phone, and added it to a folder I was building. Evidence, documentation, proof of their spending. Then I drove home, my mind already planning the next steps with cold precision. That night, I sat at my desk in my small apartment and opened my laptop with the kind of deliberate focus I usually reserved for critical work tasks. I pulled up my bank account details and began reading through the fine print carefully, line by line, the terms and conditions I'd barely glanced at when I'd first opened the account 7 years ago at age 21, the account structure, the permissions hierarchy, the user access levels, the primary holder rights versus secondary user rights. I was the primary account holder. My name was listed first. My signature was on the original documents. My social security number was tied to the account fundamentally. Marlene, Grant, and Talia all had secondary access. They could withdraw money freely, transfer funds, make purchases, check balances. But they couldn't close the account. They couldn't change its fundamental structure. They couldn't remove me as the primary holder. They couldn't lock me out or restrict my access in any way. Only I could do those things. Only I had that power. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd kept for years, one of those accordion folders with multiple sections. Inside were the original documents from when I'd set up the account all those years ago. The signature cards with my signature only, dated and stamped by the bank. The permission forms I'd filled out later to add secondary users, each one clearly marked with dates and conditions. The terms and conditions printed on paper that had yellowed slightly with age. Everything was in my name, everything traced back to me as the sole authority. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling at those same water stains shaped like unnamed continents. They thought I was harmless, weak, someone who could be used and discarded without consequence, someone who would never fight back because fighting back wasn't in my nature. They were wrong about me. They'd always been wrong about me. I pulled a clean notebook toward me, one of those simple composition notebooks with the black and white marbled cover, and started making a list in careful block letters, methodically planning each step. 1. Gather all documentation. Bank statements, original account agreements, permission forms. 2. Print comprehensive transaction logs. 4 years of history. 3. Organize by date and category. Create clear timeline. 4. Calculate total withdrawals. Get exact number with supporting evidence. 5. Research legal authority to revoke access. Know my rights completely. 6. Schedule meeting with bank. Official account restructuring. 7. Prepare for consequences. They will react badly. 8. Do not hesitate. No second guessing. No backing down. I stared at the list for a long time, my pen hovering over the paper. Then I added one more item at the bottom. 9. Remember why this is necessary. They will try to manipulate you. I set the pen down and closed the notebook. Tomorrow I would start gathering evidence, building my case, preparing for war. But tonight I just sat in the quiet darkness of my apartment and let the decision settle in my bones, like concrete hardening into something permanent and unbreakable. The public library opened at 9 in the morning. I was there at 8:55, waiting by the front entrance with my messenger bag slung over my shoulder, containing my laptop and the folder of documents from home. The October morning was cold enough that I could see my breath, and the sky was that particular shade of gray that promised rain later. The librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Kowalski, who'd worked there for as long as I could remember, unlocked the heavy glass doors and smiled when she saw me standing there. "Early bird today, Aaron. You're usually an evening visitor. Must be something important you're working on." "Got some research to do," I said simply. "Some important personal business. Study room 3 is open if you need privacy and quiet. Nobody's reserved it for today yet." "That would be perfect, thank you." The study room was small and windowless, designed for focused work without distractions. A single table occupied most of the space, with 2 chairs, fluorescent lighting overhead, and a power outlet that actually worked reliably. I set up my laptop, pulled out my folder of documents, and got to work with methodical precision. For the next 3.5 hours, I worked like I was building a legal case, because in a sense, I was. I printed transaction logs from the past 4 years, using the library's printer and paying the 10 cents per page without complaint, watching the pages pile up with mounting evidence. Withdrawals, transfers, purchases, all of it documented in neat columns showing date, time, amount, location, and merchant category code. I used a yellow highlighter to mark the ones that were clearly unauthorized, the ones made when I was verifiably at work, documented by my time cards that I'd kept copies of, the ones for luxury items that had nothing to do with emergencies or household necessities, designer clothes, expensive restaurant meals, electronics that exceeded any reasonable need, the ones that exceeded any rational definition of what emergency access should cover. The highlighted pages began to stack up like evidence in a criminal investigation. The numbers added up quickly, line by line, withdrawal by withdrawal, month by month, year by year. 47,283, and saw over 4 years. Nearly $50,000, money I'd earned with my body and my time, money I'd saved carefully by living frugally and denying myself luxuries, money that should have been building my future and my security. Gone. Vanished into their hands like water down a drain. I organized the statements by date and category, creating a comprehensive timeline that told a clear and damning story. Emergency water heater repair in month 6, except I later learned they'd actually just wanted a nicer model. Talia's laptop in month 8, top of the line, expensive, probably used more for social media than actual schoolwork. Grant's shop expenses in month 12, which seemed to be a regular monthly occurrence rather than a one-time emergency. On and on, a pattern of escalation from hundreds per month initially to thousands per month recently. Then I cross-referenced everything with my own meticulously kept records. Pay stubs I'd saved in a box at home, going back years because I'd always been careful about documentation. Expense reports from the extraction yard showing exactly when I'd been at work. Time cards proving I'd been 30 miles away when certain withdrawals occurred, making it impossible for me to have made them myself. I was building an ironclad case that this wasn't shared money being used for shared purposes. This was theft, plain and simple, even if it was technically legal theft because I'd granted them access. Once the physical documentation was organized into labeled folders, one for transaction logs, one for legal research, one for my personal documentation proving sole ownership, I moved to researching the legal framework. I wasn't a lawyer, obviously, but I understood contracts and logistics and regulations. That had been an increasing part of my job at the extraction site over the past 2 years, tracking equipment movements, managing vendor relationships, ensuring compliance with safety regulations and documentation requirements. The same analytical and detail-oriented skills applied here, just in a different context. I read through articles about bank account permissions and secondary user rights and responsibilities. I researched financial responsibility and liability in shared account situations. I looked up relevant banking regulations about what constituted proper use of emergency access. I even found some case law about unauthorized withdrawals and what separated legitimate shared expenses from financial exploitation. The legal picture became crystal clear, black and white with no ambiguity. As the primary account holder whose name was on the original account documents, I had full and absolute authority to revoke secondary user access at any time, for any reason or no reason at all. The secondary users, my mother, Grant, Talia, could be removed with a single form submission at the bank. No explanation required, no permission needed from them, no advance notice necessary. They had been granted a privilege, not a right, and privileges could be revoked at will, but there was more. Something even better that I discovered while reading through the fine print of credit card agreements. Any debts accrued through credit cards linked to the checking account would remain the sole responsibility of the individual cardholders once the connection to the funding account was severed. If they'd been using credit cards tied to my account as the payment source, and I knew they had, I'd seen the monthly statements and the automatic payments, those outstanding balances would become entirely their problem once I cut off access to my funds. They'd be left holding their own debt with no access to my money to pay it off, no safety net, no backup plan. The thought made me smile faintly, coldly, a smile without warmth or humor, just satisfaction at a plan coming together. By noon, I had everything organized with the kind of precision that would have made Dutch proud. Printed documents in labeled manila folders with tabs, a comprehensive timeline of withdrawals printed on a single sheet showing the clear escalation pattern, a summary page with the total amount taken, broken down by year and by category, proof of my sole authority over the account, with highlighted sections from the bank's terms of service. I packed everything carefully into my messenger bag, organizing it so I could access whatever I needed quickly, and drove to the bank with steady hands on the wheel. The branch was quiet when I arrived just after 1 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. A few customers at the teller windows conducting routine transactions, deposits, withdrawals, check cashing, soft instrumental music playing overhead through hidden speakers, the kind of generic, calming music designed to make you feel relaxed and trusting, the smell of new carpet and industrial air conditioning. I approached the main customer service desk where a young woman sat behind a nameplate that read, Sarah Mitchell, Customer Service Representative. I need to speak with an account manager about restructuring my accounts and removing secondary users, I said clearly and professionally. She smiled with practiced professionalism. Of course, sir. Let me see who's available to help you with that. May I have your name, please? Erin Hale. She typed into her computer, clicked her mouse a few times, then picked up her desk phone and spoke quietly into it for about 30 seconds. Then she looked up at me with that same professional smile. Ms. Carver can see you right now. She's our senior account manager and handles all account restructuring. Just go through that door on the right, and she's in the first office on your left." "Thank you very much," I said. The woman who greeted me in the office was in her 40s, professional and polished in a way that suggested years of experience handling difficult financial situations. She wore a dark navy blazer over a white blouse, minimal jewelry, and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her nameplate read, "Rebecca Carver, Senior Account Manager." "Mr. Hale," she said, standing and offering her hand across the desk. Her handshake was firm and confident. "Please, have a seat and make yourself comfortable. How can I help you today?" I sat down in the chair across from her desk and placed my messenger bag on the floor beside me. "I need to restructure my checking account. Specifically, I need to remove all secondary users and immediately freeze their spending privileges." Ms. Carver's expression remained professionally neutral, but I saw something shift in her eyes, a sharpening of attention, a recognition that this was more than routine business. "I see. That's certainly something we can help you with. May I start by seeing your identification and getting your account information?" I handed her my driver's license and a piece of paper with my account number written on it. She examined my ID carefully, comparing the photo to my face, then typed my information into her computer. She reviewed the screen for what felt like a long moment, but was probably only 30 seconds, scrolling through information I couldn't see. Then she looked up at me with that same professional neutrality. "You're listed as the primary account holder on this account, which was opened in March of 2018. That gives you full authority to make these changes without needing permission or signatures from anyone else. May I ask if there's a specific concern prompting this restructuring?" "Unauthorized use of funds," I said simply, seeing no reason to elaborate or explain further. She nodded slowly, and I saw understanding in her eyes. She'd probably handled situations like this before, family members who'd been taken advantage of finally taking control. "I understand completely, and I want you to know we take these situations very seriously. Before we proceed with the changes, I should inform you about what will happen once we process this request, so you understand all the implications. Is that all right?" "Yes, please. I want to understand everything. First, and most importantly, removing secondary users is permanent. Once we process this change, they would need your explicit permission and your physical presence here at the bank to be re-added to the account. This can't be done over the phone or online. You would have to come here in person with them and sign new authorization forms. I understand that. That's exactly what I want." "All right." She pulled up a series of forms on her computer screen, typing as she spoke. "Second, removing these users will immediately deactivate any debit cards linked to your account that are in their possession. They won't be able to make purchases, withdrawals from ATMs, or any other transactions. Any pending transactions that haven't fully cleared yet may be declined." "That's fine. When you say immediately, what's the timeline?" "The deactivation is instant in our system as soon as I process it. However, it can take up to 15 minutes for all points of sale and ATMs across the entire network to update their databases with the new information. After that 15-minute window, any attempt to use those cards will be declined every single time." "Perfect. And what about credit cards?" Her expression shifted slightly. "Ah, do the secondary users have credit cards that use this checking account as the automatic payment source?" "Yes. At least 2 of them do, maybe all 3. "Then here's what happens with those." She pulled up another screen. "Any outstanding balances on credit cards will become the sole responsibility of the individual cardholders once we sever the automatic payment connection. Those balances won't transfer to you or show up in your account in any way, but they also won't be paid automatically from your checking account anymore. The cardholders will need to make their own payment arrangements directly with the credit card company. So if they have large balances, they'll need to pay those balances themselves using their own funds." "Yes." She met my eyes directly. "I want to be very clear about this, so there are no surprises later. If they've been making only minimum payments and carrying large balances because they knew the payment would come from your account automatically, they're going to find themselves in a difficult situation very quickly." I felt that cold satisfaction again. "I understand. That's acceptable to me." Ms. Carver studied me for a long moment, and I could see her making calculations, understanding the full situation without me having to explain it explicitly. She'd probably seen this exact scenario before, family members who'd been systematically exploited finally cutting the cord. "All right then," she said with a slight nod. "Let me print the necessary forms, and we'll get this processed for you right away." She turned to her computer and began typing efficiently. Her printer hummed to life and started producing documents. After about 2 minutes, she gathered several printed pages and slid them across the desk toward me, along with a pen from the holder on her desk. I'll need your signature in 3 places. This first form officially revokes all secondary user access and removes their authorization from the account. This second form confirms that you understand all the implications we've discussed: the card deactivation, the credit card payment changes, the permanence of the decision. This third form documents the exact date and time of the revocation for our legal records. I took the pen and signed each form without hesitation, my signature clear and decisive. The same signature I'd put on the original account document 7 years ago. The signature that had built this account through honest work. She reviewed each signature carefully, compared them to my driver's license one more time, then entered something into her computer with a series of deliberate keystrokes. I watched her work, saw her fingers move across the keyboard, saw her mouse click several times in succession. I saw the exact moment she hit what must have been the final confirmation key that made everything official. The revocations are now in effect as of... She glanced at her computer clock. 2:47 p.m. today. All linked debit cards will be deactivated within the next 15 minutes as the changes propagate through the banking network. The secondary users will receive formal notification of these changes via postal mail within 5 business days, as required by banking regulations. 15 minutes, I repeated, wanting to be absolutely sure. So by 3:02 p.m., all their cards will be completely disabled? Correct. After 3:02, any attempt to use those cards will result in an immediate decline. The cards will show as invalid in every system. Perfect, I said, feeling that word didn't quite capture what I was feeling, but it was close enough. Is there anything else I can help you with today, Mr. Hale? Actually, yes. One more thing. I leaned forward slightly. I'd like to transfer the majority of my savings into a completely new account, separate from this one. New account number, new debit card, new checks, no connection whatsoever to the old account. Of course. That's actually a very wise decision given the circumstances. She began setting up the transfer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Would you like to keep the original account open with a minimal balance or close it entirely? Keep it open, but leave exactly $100 in it. Transfer everything else to the new account. She paused and looked at me with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been understanding. May I ask why you want to keep the old account open with such a small balance? I met her eyes directly. So, when they try to check the balance or access it, they'll see it still exists. They'll see that $100 balance and understand exactly what happened, that I didn't close the account by accident or because of a bank error, that I deliberately, consciously chose to cut them off and leave them with almost nothing. Ms. Carver's expression didn't change, but I saw the faintest hint of approval in her eyes, maybe even respect. I understand completely. That's actually quite common in these situations. Sometimes people need to send a very clear message. She worked on her computer for another few minutes, setting up the new account, ordering new cards, printing temporary checks. When she finished, she handed me a folder containing all my new account information. Your new account is fully active right now. I'm printing you a temporary debit card that will work immediately. You can use it today if needed. Your permanent card and checkbook will arrive by mail in 7 to 10 business days. I've transferred $31,456.78 into the new account. The old account now shows a balance of exactly $100.00. I took the folder and looked at the temporary card she'd given me. It had my name on it, a new account number, everything fresh and clean and entirely mine. Thank you, I said, and I meant it sincerely. You've been very helpful and professional about all of this. You're very welcome, Mr. Hale. And if I may say something off the record? She waited until I nodded. Good for you. It takes courage to set boundaries with family, especially when they've been taking advantage for a long time. You did the right thing. I stood up, shook her hand again, and walked out of the bank carrying that folder like it was the most valuable thing I'd ever owned. Because in a way, it was. It represented freedom. 25 minutes later, I sat in my truck in the bank parking lot with the engine running and looked at the confirmation receipt Ms. Carver had given me before I left her office. Account restructuring completed. All secondary user access permanently revoked. Effective date and time, October 28th, 2:47 p.m. I checked my watch. 3:12 p.m. 25 minutes ago. Their cards had already been inactive for 10 minutes now. Right at this very moment, somewhere in town, one of them was probably trying to use a card and watching it get declined. Probably confused at first. Probably assuming it was a temporary glitch, a system error, something that would resolve itself quickly. They had no idea yet. Not really. They'd figure it out soon enough. I started the truck and drove to the diner on Route 9, my hand steady on the wheel, feeling lighter than I had felt in 4 years. Uncle Ron was there, finishing a late lunch when I arrived, sitting in his usual spot by the window with a newspaper spread out on the table beside his half-eaten sandwich. "Twice in 2 days," he said, as I sat down across from him, folding his newspaper and setting it aside. "You must really like the terrible coffee they serve here." "It's consistently terrible," I said, managing a faint smile. "There's something to be said for consistency, even if it's consistently bad." He folded the newspaper and studied my face with those sharp, experienced eyes. "You look different than you did yesterday." "Do I?" "Calmer, more settled, like you made a big decision and you're completely okay with it. No regrets." I ordered coffee from the waitress without looking at the menu. When she left, I said quietly, "You ever have one of those moments where everything just becomes crystal clear? Where you suddenly understand exactly what you need to do and there's no doubt anymore?" "Once or twice in my life," Ron said, his eyes sharp and knowing. "Usually right before I did something I couldn't take back. Something permanent." "Was it good or bad? Looking back on it now." "Both," he said thoughtfully. "Depends on who you ask and when you ask them. But I don't regret any of those decisions, if that's what you're really asking." I nodded slowly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen, already knowing what I'd see. A text from Talia. "Need you to send me $300 for rent. Due tomorrow morning. Don't make me wait this time." I typed back with steady fingers. "No." 3 dots appeared immediately, indicating she was typing. Then, "What do you mean no?" "I mean no," I typed clearly. "Are you serious right now? I need that money. Rent is due." "Not my problem." "You're impossible. Mom was completely right about you. You're self-centered, and you've always been that way." I set the phone face down on the table and took a sip of my terrible coffee. Ron raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask the question directly. Just said, "Trouble in paradise?" "Not anymore," I said. "Not for me, anyway." He smiled slightly, a knowing expression that suggested he understood exactly what was happening. "Good for you, kid. Seriously, good for you." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking terrible coffee and watching the afternoon traffic pass by on Route 9. Just 2 men who understood that sometimes the best thing you can do is cut away what's poisoning you, no matter how much it hurts initially.